Ah, welcome back. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to be talking about the ideal of the perfect family and how it's changed. So, and this is something that's really important that anthropologists have to recognize when we're dealing with different cultures. We have to recognize the fact that there are, and I've mentioned this before, there are sort of like theoretical truth, and then there is ground truth. And we have to sort of deal with this sort of issue of what we want to have happen, what we believe is what's happening, versus what's actually happening. And what does that mean? Okay, so in American culture, we have the American dream, okay? And that American dream, as described to me, was this, you got married, and you bought a house with a white picket fence. You had 2.4 kids. I'm not sure where the 0.4 comes in. Could be a really small child. And a dog. And possibly a cat. I'd rather stick with the dog. I like dogs more. Yeah, cats are great, I know. Anyway, so that's sort of like the American dream. That's what sort of this 1950s era American dream was like, this Leave It to Beaver. And if you don't know what Leave It to Beaver is, you should totally check it out because it's a huge part of that American ideology that came out of the 50s. Leave It to Beaver and, oh God. Okay, so there's a lot of old ones that I don't recall. But there are a number of these old shows that sort of put together this ideological idea of what the perfect American family was. And oftentimes it was this, man and woman living in a house. The man works, the woman is the housewife, and there might be a couple of different kids, and there's usually a dog. One might be Lassie, right? And how this family would deal with issues, but how ideologically they were so great, right? And we've used this ideology, and this is what a lot of people, even outside of our country, have seen and looked at and said, oh, this is the American life. This is what we should be, sort of striving for. And we can look and see how media has had such a huge impact on that. And of course, today, sort of considering that idea of the American dream as being that, a husband and wife, a couple of kids and a dog and a white picket fence and a house is so outrageously not even a reality of what our multicultural, multidimensional approach to families is now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those ideologies aren't still there. And that's that ideological truth. That's that theoretical truth of what we consider to be desirable versus the grounded truth of what we are actually experiencing and how those families are actually organized and where we find that right and wrong. I think one of the interesting things that I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they are bringing back the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And I loved the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air growing up. I thought it was a great show. I thought there was I thought it was fun and interesting and some good morals, but very lighthearted for the most part. And and that seemed like a really interesting show to me. But they're redoing it. And this new approach that they're taking is taking not a controversial one, but I think a much more realistic approach to what is actually happening with families and what they're experiencing, and what this approach might be. And yeah, this is the telling of a story of a kid that's getting sent to live with his aunt and uncle in a rich part of California from Philadelphia, right? But where it breaks off from this theoretical truth, the original one, and then going over here to the ground truth of what you might actually have experienced living in that community, and the issues of gang violence and all kinds of stuff that would cause you to make this change. So, I think that's a decent example of what theoretical truth versus ground truth might actually look like. So, we have this ideological issue of what the perfect family might look like. And of course, this has changed. Again, we look back at what it was like to live in the 50s when a lot of this ideology was sort of this current ideology that we have, which back in the 50s was a totally different ideology from what it was 50 years prior to that. Because, subsequent generations will oftentimes change. But if we look at our multifunctional families where we, if it's totally okay to get divorced, where 50% of our marriages actually end in divorce, then blending families and having parents with children from other relationships are now coming together. Well, that's okay. Because it used to not be okay, right? In fact, if you were a woman and you were divorced, you were practically labeled as a pariah, right? You were untouchable. And the likelihood of you finding another relationship, even if you were widowed, right? Not even divorced, but widowed, right? You might have serious issues about finding another partner. Where in case as the men, right? If you were a man and you were widowed, you were expected to find another woman. And there was no stigma against you necessarily finding another wife to take. Because if you were widowed, then you had kids, well, you're not expected to take care of those kids. You need a woman to take care of those kids, right? So, yeah, so it was expected of you. But if you were a woman and you already had kids and became widowed or became divorced for whatever reason, it was going to be really hard for you to find someone else to marry and to have that relationship with. So again, the differences between the gender realities. This idea of living in sin. I don't know if you guys know this term, but living in sin was this idea that you would live with someone before you were married. Hey, what are you doing? Hey, knock it off, you big goof. So, living in sin. This idea that you would live with a partner before you were married, and you might even be like having intercourse before you were married. And that was terrible. You were going to hell for doing something like that. You were living in sin. Ideologically, sex before marriage was totally inappropriate. And, you were expected that after marriage, you would move into a house, and that would be the first time that you would actually, live with this person. Now, I probably don't have to explain to you how terrible that actually is. At least from my own personal standpoint, and probably from a lot of your own, I suspect. We all know what it's like to live with someone and to break up with someone. And it was probably a good test run to live with them for a little while to figure out whether or not you were going to be a good connection. Now, think about not having to be with that person, not getting the chance to do that test run until you actually got married, and then you figured out, whoa, maybe we aren't the best for each other. Maybe we aren't the best couple because we didn't know about all this other stuff that comes with being that family, right? So the ideological idea, the truth behind that is that, you're somehow going to be happier if you wait versus having that practical experience. That could be more ideological on my my experience. But again, as an anthropologist, we have to sort of look at the consequences of this. What could be the benefits of both, right? What's the benefit of not having sex before you get married and not living in the same location until you get married? Well, there might be some meaning behind, let's say, having kids. If you have a stable relationship and you're married and you're financially stable and organized and set up and all that stuff, and then you start having kids, you're probably going to have an easier time of raising those kids if you've got more resources, if you've got two parents instead of one. Now, of course, that's not knocking single parents, because I know plenty of great, fantastic single parents out there that are doing a perfectly great job. But at the same time, there might be people that say that, hey, this might be an easier way of doing it. Now, at the same time, what happens if you get married and all of a sudden your spouse is not cracked up to what you thought they were, and maybe they're abusive, and you didn't know that because you didn't live with them and you didn't spend the time? That could be an argument for the other side that says, practical experience might be a better way of, experiencing living together first and then getting married and having kids as an approach. So as anthropologists, we have to sort of step back from our own thoughts and ideologies of this, recognizing your own bias, and I know my bias on this, and saying what actually is better, or what is different. What are the benefits and the issues that you're going to face with both of these? And when you're studying a culture that practices these, how do they work? Do they work? Are they successful? And so that's going to be part of your objective is to find out how these different approaches work in these communities. So, in conclusion to this lecture on kinship and family and the relationships that you build through shared experience and through friendship and all of that stuff, there's a lot of things that we're going to cover here in just a sec. So, as a conclusion, is he bugging you? Is he literally bugging you, that fly? So there are many ways that we find people related to each other, okay? And how we determine what's important to families, how they're organized, how they share resources, might differ from community to community. And that can give us an idea of what they find important, right? And how they can relate to each other, right? Are we generationally related. So are all of my parents, are they all parents? Right? Is my mom's sisters and brothers, do I call them mom and dad as well? And are all my cousins, are they all brothers and sisters? Versus, say, how everyone has their own distinct relationship. And do we follow a patriarchal or a matriarchal system of lineage and how we trace back our ancestors? And through that, as we do with lineage, part of that is about passing down resources. So if we're a patrilineal or a matrilineal society, when your grandparents die, where do their resources go to? Who gains access to those resources? If it's a matrilineal system, then anything that your grandmother owns will probably go to her daughters, right? And if there aren't any daughters, then it might go to, if they have a son, then it might go to his wife, right? So it'll stay within usually like the woman's side of the family and get passed down. And we have some of that, in today, especially if we look at how we transfer goods. Say if your mom dies, right? Heaven forbid that actually happens. There are certain things that are usually passed from mother to daughter. That might be like wedding rings or jewelry or something like that. That might be very specific or might be passed down from previous generations. So it might be something that her mother had given to her and that she was going to pass on to you. So that wealth might be directly connected to that lineage. So we've looked at the different types of lineage, so patrilineal, matrilineal, and bilineal. We've looked at the 6 different types of kinship systems and how they're organized and how some of those structures might be looked at as far as how those family units might interact with each other. What are their rights and responsibilities, and how might those family units look like? We know that marriages are diverse in nature and can be found in nearly all communities, but how they are constructed, whether it's through monogamy, whether it's through polygamy or polyandry, whether or not serial marriages are appropriate, all of that kind of stuff. There's lots of different ways of how we connect and how many people we connect to. We understand that most people marry sort of outside of their clan, outside of their immediate family group. And that a lot of times that's for economic reasons and social reasons, so that we're extending our social networks outside of our immediate, and we're also dealing with sort of the incest taboo of having possible genetic issues that might arise from that, and so we have biological reasons and we have security reasons. So we find kinship is oftentimes more organized around shared history, shared family, a sharing of resources, and that they are oftentimes more strongly based or organized than you would find in, say, a religious organization or political orientation. Kinship has a tendency to be very, very strong and people will do more for their kin than they will for any of these other organizations that they might be affiliated with. We've looked at how the nuclear family has changed over time, and how that might affect like our own society. What are some of the issues that we might be facing with dealing with a smaller family organization, and how you might not have as many resources and it might be more focused on the individual rather than the community or the larger family. And then we've also talked about how our society and our ideals based on family construction and the idea of like the nuclear family, how that's changed and has changed sort of dramatically from the ideals that we've had, sort of that American dream, the husband and wife with the big white house and white picket fence and 2.4 kids and a dog, and how that idealistic reality is very different from the on the ground reality, that ground truth, that people don't really behave that way. At least not anymore. So, we can take a look at all of this stuff and start thinking about how families and kinship and friendship can give us an idea of how a community is going to behave. What are they going to find important? What are the things that they might engage in to help their community members out? If we think about sort of the modern nuclear family in the United States, that small units that have to be very self-reliant, that might not have sort of the safety nets that might normally support them if they're in a larger community. What do you think they're going to be organized, or what do you think they're going to be focused on? And if we think about it, if you're isolated, if you have to be dependent on your own resources, are you going to be willing to stick your neck out for someone else? Or are you going to be more self-contained? And I think that's a really important to think about, especially when it comes to American culture, is that we are, in a sense, very much idealistically a nation of individuals, right? And we have this tendency to look at the world through this individualistic approach. What's good for me can help the people that I care about the most, yes, but that's usually not a very big group. And so when it comes to what might be going on outside of our individualistic areas of influence, we might not engage as much. However, if you were living in a larger group where you've got multiple generations and multiple roles of parentage, right? If you had to stick your neck out or you ran into trouble or something like that, the likelihood of you reaping really bad consequences is pretty slim. But one of the things that might also be an issue would be, say, creativity or entrepreneurship. When you're an individual and you have to survive being an individual, you oftentimes have to figure out how to do that. And that'll oftentimes take you to uncomfortable places where you might succeed more. And this is where, in a sense, capitalism and striving for yourself to better yourself can come into place. Whereas if you live in that bigger community, you don't have necessarily the stress, so you might have more more of a safety net, but less of a drive to further yourself, to improve yourself so much, because you don't have to. So there are multiple things that we can look at for each of these different communities, for each of these different kinship organizations. Like, what could be the benefits for this, and what can be the drawbacks, right? What is the networking going to look like for these families? And how are they going to deal with different thoughts on how to survive, right? And how to go through the rest of the world, and how do they see themselves as individuals and as community members, right? We as Americans oftentimes see ourselves as individuals outside of the community. And, you know, we might live in a community, we might have different communities that we're oftentimes associated with, but our mental issues oftentimes deal with subjects like loneliness, right? And depression because of that. So if you live in larger groups, you know, that loneliness certainly isn't going to be there. And that essence of depression might not be there as well. So you might face different challenges based on these different living conditions, different kinship realities. So for homework, again, reflection paper, you know, write about a page of what we've covered in these lectures, and tell me what you think. How is your family structured? Do you relate to any of this? Do you have any new insight into your own family? And are there similarities to how you grew up to maybe some of these other social organization, the different kinship groups? And then, you know, maybe explore other things, like whatever it is that sort of sparked an idea for you to write about. You know, write it down, get it turned in, and yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and leave it there. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next time. Take it easy, be safe, wear a mask. Vote. Go out and vote. Not vote yet. Can't vote. It's too early. But vote anyway. Plan for it. Organize for it. Mail it in. Drop it off. I don't care. Just vote. Just throwing it out there right now. Yeah, okay. Have a good one. See you later.